We will go through a couple of facts about the country, then also why, quickly summarize why I think it's such a beautiful destination. I will talk about a couple of places the most preferred or most popular travel destinations, some routes, and also just some details you need to know about traveling, like the best time and how long, etc. Cool. Let's get it started. So first of all, where is Vietnam? Vietnam is in Southeast Asia, bordering the countries China, Laos, and Cambodia, and has a South China Sea entirely to the east. It's a very long country. A lot of travelers always underestimate that. That's a common misconception that the country is very small. But because it's so long, travel timings and traveling takes very, very long in that country. The coastline itself is 3,260 kilometers long. So it's a very long country. It's part of Indochina. Indochina is considered the Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And that came about because all three countries were occupied by France and were called Indochine by the French colonists. The country is divided in three regions: North, Central, and South. This happens mostly out of historical reasons, but also because the climate in those regions is very, very different. So that's why people always, and especially in tourism, they're always dividing it in these three different regions. But of course, there are also different states and different districts as well. But if you want to talk about regions in tourism, that is what you consider. Only 20% of the country is flat. So the country doesn't have really high mountains, but it's still a mountainous or hilly landscape. Most of the country is just covered by like what they call karst formation or limestone rocks or limestone hills. So it's very, very hilly, and only in the south flat, which makes agriculture a little bit difficult, but a very green and very natural rich country. There is as you can see also at some parts in the middle, I don't know, can you guys, I don't know if you can see my, the mouse moving around.
Yes, Adina, we can.
So in the central part, it gets really, really narrow. It's only 48 kilometers between the border of Laos until the coast. So it's very narrow at that point. All right, a couple of hard facts. The capital of Vietnam is Hanoi. But there are also a couple of other big cities that are equally big in population and size, especially Ho Chi Minh City, or formerly known as Saigon, in south of Vietnam. Hanoi is in the north. And then in central Vietnam is Da Nang, which is a very modern, has grown really quickly, really big. Then in Ha Long Bay, a tourist destination we hear about later, there's a big city called Hai Phong. And there's also more in the south, even further south than Ho Chi Minh City is Can Tho. Those are the biggest cities of Vietnam. Most of the people in Vietnam are called Viet. So the Viet people are the people that live in Vietnam. But there are also 54 or 53 other ethnic groups that are indigenous to Vietnam. Those are mostly hill tribes. So tribes that are living in the mountains, very secluded, and have very distinct traditions, very distinct lifestyles. And they're maintaining them really well, and the government is also supporting and protecting these kind of tribal traditions and tribal lifestyles. The currency of Vietnam is the Vietnamese dong. Due to the American embargo and after the Vietnam War, the inflation of that currency is really crazy. So in Vietnam, you will always be a millionaire. You go once to the ATM and withdraw some money, and you'll be a millionaire very easily. You see, $1 is 23,000 Vietnamese dong. And even in rupees, 1 rupee is already 300 dong. That is fun in one hand, but it also makes it really, really easy to get scammed or to lose, not to lose money, but to get confused with your money, because a lot of the notes look similar and there's just 1 0 more. And it sometimes makes it, when you travel for the first time to Vietnam, a little bit difficult. I'm just gonna quickly, it is interesting for Vietnam, especially when you come from the Western world, to talk about or to get to know about the political system. It's very similar to China. It's a one-party system. It's socialist. So the industry, the economy is mostly state regulated, but it's also really capitalist. So just like China, they're all about making money really quick, very cheap. So not really what they initially considered as a socialist system. And freedom of speech and freedom of religion is a little bit of an issue in Vietnam, just like it is in China. It's not as crazy as there, but there are definitely people that are suffering and yeah, and that are against that system and suffer under the authorities. So it's a little bit difficult, but in the same time, when you travel around, you don't really have any, that doesn't have any impact on your travels. Religion is complicated, but also really, really interesting because of the long occupation of the Chinese powers in Vietnam. Their religion and their beliefs have just come over to Vietnam as well. So that's Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism, and they call them the three teachings. So they are like basically believe in a combination of the three of them. But that is not really super practice. It's what people believe in, but it's not something that you practice on a daily basis. But what they do practice a lot is something called ancestor worship. So people have shrines at their homes where they pray and give offerings to their ancestors. And these can go centuries back. And the funny thing about that is they often offer really funny things for them to enjoy in the afterlife. So for example, if your grandfather really liked cigarettes, and you want him to enjoy cigarettes, you put in the shrine cigarettes and hope that he gets them. And also you need money in the afterlife, so that you can actually buy paper money, burn it in the shrine, and then the people, the ancestors in the afterlife can enjoy it. It's super interesting, it's really funny to watch, and it's all over. Every family does it. Very quickly, Vietnam history is a really complex subject, but it's very interesting, and it has a lot, you experience a lot of it while you travel there. So first of all, it was for 1,000 years occupied by the Chinese, mostly in North Vietnam. So you have Chinese influence in architecture, in, like I said, religion before, in culture, in food, a lot of Chinese influence in Vietnam. And then for the next 900 years, it was just a cluster of a lot of smaller monarchies, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. And in between, the Chinese came again and occupied some parts of it. And then in 1858, so around 150 years ago, the French took over at the same time as they took over Cambodia and Laos. So as I said earlier, this is how the whole region of Indochina came together. And by 1945, so around the same time when India got independent, a little bit earlier, Vietnam was fighting for independence and then fought a war from 1945 until 76, first against the French and then against the Americans who didn't want the socialism and communism to spread. And that was, in a lot of ways, a way more brutal war and a way more devastating war than even the Second or the First World War, because of the weapons, both on the destroying weapons that both sides used. It was a really brutal war, and there's a lot of ways that the Vietnamese are showing this and displaying this to the tourists as well. So there are lots of museums, lots of sites, and it's something that is always present on a trip in Vietnam. And yeah, after 76, the country came together again after it was separated in two parts. And since then, we have the social system that is there right now. All right, let's talk about why should you visit Vietnam. For me, the most important thing, because I love nature, I love landscape, I love to look at really beautiful landscapes. And I think most of the tourists traveling to Vietnam have the same in mind. So number one reason to visit Vietnam is nature and landscape. I divided this here quickly in different regions. So there's the Mekong Delta in the south. This is basically where the long river that starts in China empties into the sea, going by lots of different rivers in the delta into the sea. It's also considered the rice bowl of Vietnam because here all the agriculture, most of the agriculture in Vietnam happens here. So there's a lot of waterways, very green, green landscape. It's very popular. There's a lot of people living here, a lot of villages, a lot of cities. It's always really warm there. It's very humid. So that is a great area to visit for sure. Then Central Vietnam has, you can see here in the second picture, oh, I actually did a mistake here. It's not Hanoi, it's Hoi An, sorry. mistake, spelling mistake. Yeah, in central Vietnam, you have on the border to Laos, the central highlands that are running just north of Ho Chi Minh City all the way to the north of Vietnam. So very mountainous, as I mentioned before, and towards the coast, it's more flat, where you have, again, lots of rice paddies, lots of green fields, lots of waterways, and then the beautiful coastline. So over there is a lot to see and a lot of different nature and landscape, which makes it a very interesting place. Even though it's very narrow there, as I mentioned before, you have lots of different, like lots of diversity in landscape. Then in the north, you have one of the #1 travel destinations for Vietnam, which is called Ha Long Bay. It's basically the bay in the Southeast Asia Sea, Southeast China Sea, where lots of limestone, towering limestone hills come out of the water, and there are thousands of them, and you can take a cruise ship through them, and it's just a really fascinating sight. And then even north of there, in the big head of Vietnam, you have the higher mountains, where the mountains get so high that it can even snow in the winter. And over there you have a famous hill station called Sapa, which I get to talk about later as well. And over there is also the highest mountain in, not just in Vietnam, but also in entire Indochina, which is called Phan Xipang. So Phan Xipang is close to Sapa, and yeah, it can be covered by snow in the winter. Quickly, Vietnam doesn't really have a lot of wildlife, or like it's famous for wildlife. Of course, there's like a rich biodiversity and lots of primates, birds, insects, snakes, but it's not famous for any like big cats or elephants or something. So people don't come for wildlife, but trekking and trekking in the jungle, trekking in the mountain is something that people definitely are interested in. The second reason why to visit Vietnam is the really interesting and rich culture and history. As I mentioned before, the diverse religion, not getting into that much, but it's just all over and interesting to get to know. Because of its diverse past of like lots of different influences from abroad, traditions are just so complex, and the daily lifestyle is very complex. The people are really, really warm, very hospitable, because they see a lot of potential in tourism. So they're really open to foreigners. Even Americans now. Took them a while to get warm with them, but now they are. They're very resilient. Like Vietnamese are famous for being a very, very resilient population, because I mean, they were the first that basically fought off the Americans and like kicked them out. And that is not just that before they were the Chinese and the French, and they always fought and they always stayed strong and they always stood up for their own identity and their own culture, which is very, yeah, just makes Vietnamese a really interesting people. And something else that I find really cool about this, about the people in Vietnam, is that it has one of the strongest women that I've ever seen. Like there's no country that I've been to that has stronger and more confident and more hardworking women there. Like the women are basically running the country while the men just sit back and sip coffee and beer. You experience that very quickly in the country. Then everybody knows a lot about nature and about plants, about herbs. Everybody has plants at home, on their balconies, even in the cities, but in the countryside even more so. And everybody knows, like they're all really, really well educated about that. And the last picture, you see a lady from the Hmong tribe, which lives in the north of Vietnam. So they are, like I said before, they have very distinct cultures. They have very traditional, very beautiful traditional clothes that they make themselves. And they marry really early and have very, very strong family bonds. And they really maintain their own traditions very well. There's also a couple of really interesting festivals. The biggest one is the Vietnamese New Year's. I don't know if you remember, but Claudia visited Vietnam this year, and she went during the Vietnamese New Year's time. It's called Tet, and it takes more than a week. Like everything is shot for more than a week. There's lots of fireworks, people go home, share food, share gifts, and it's not that good for tourists to come there at that time, because there's not much they can do with everything shut. But if you know Vietnamese people and can visit a homestay, etc., then it's very nice. Similar to Diwali, basically. And yeah, number 3 in the reasons why to visit Vietnam is definitely the food. Like the food is absolutely fantastic in Vietnam. It's fresh, it's healthy, it's non-veg. The vegetarians really have trouble there. But if you can eat meat and if you like to eat meat, then it's absolutely fantastic. You have so many different types of soups, so many different kinds of way to eat rice. A normal family meal is usually you get a small bowl of rice, like a small bowl in your hand and chopsticks, and you take lots of dishes and put it in your bowl together with rice, mix it with herbs, mix it with dips, mix it with fish sauce, and just enjoy it like a buffet. You see that in the third picture, which is actually a picture I took at a homestay that I stayed in, where we did a little barbecue. And you see all the small empty bowls. This is for everybody who eats.
So, Adina, that's the hot plate meals, the hot bowls.
No. So that is not a hot plate. That is it's just a normal family meal that you would have on a daily basis. The second picture is a breakfast that I had at one of the B&Bs. So the soup is the famous soup pho. Not people read it and say it pho, but it's not pho, it's pho. That's number one rule when you go to Vietnam. You have to learn that. And you have the Vietnamese coffee, which is also very famous. Vietnamese coffee is what people drink there, like how Italians drink coffee, the Vietnamese also drink coffee all the time. And the first is some mussel, so seafood with the long coastline in Vietnam is obviously very present. And the last picture is a French influence in food called banh mi. It's a baguette filled with absolutely deliciousness, lots of herbs, vegetables, and of course meat. And it's a snack that a lot of tourists really enjoy because it's quickly made, it's very cheap, and it's not a sub that you would get in America. It's way more delicious and way more fresh.
But you only get it in the French part, or even?
No, you get it everywhere. What I meant to say with this is it's basically the baguette the French brought in. Like there were no baguettes. There was not, like, people didn't eat anything wheat based in Vietnam before the French came. And then the French slowly started with wheat growth in Vietnam. And then the Vietnamese also got used to that bread, and they made basically a Vietnamese version of a sub or a sandwich. And that is banh mi, and it's really, really delicious.
Looks nice.
Also interesting about Vietnam is the variety of fruits. Like you get so many different kinds of fruits and so delicious fruits. It's the biggest exporter of dragon fruit and passion fruit, and I just love passion fruit. I could eat it the whole damn day. I could talk about food a lot. You see a couple of more pictures later. If you have any more questions about that, but I don't want to talk 1 hour about food only. I could, but I don't want to. Another reason is that lots of different experience that you can do in Vietnam. So the beautiful thing about Vietnam is the tourism industry has grown really quickly over the last years, and it's one of the most visited countries in Southeast Asia. And the country and the tourism industry has really quickly picked on that and created a lot of beautiful experience. So they're not just talking about normal sightseeing tours, like just going with a guide through a city. No, they really created really strong, really rich, and very specific experience. So here in the pictures, you see in the first thing, you see where you get to know the agricultural and local life in the countryside. The second is a bicycle tour. It's a very shitty selfie of me, sorry. But you can do bicycle tours in a lot of places in Vietnam. And motorbike tours you can do everywhere. Every place offers motorbike tours. Motorbikes are #1 transport mode in Vietnam. So it just makes sense that you as a tourist get on it as well, mostly as a co-passenger on tours, of course. And just get to know the countryside like the locals would do, or the cities even, not just the countryside. And as I mentioned before, there's also a lot of trekking. So in the mountains in the north, in the central highlands, everywhere you can do a lot of trekking. But there's so much more. There's cooking classes, there's street food tours, there are beer tours. I did a beer tour and it was absolutely fantastic. There are nightlife tours, pub crawls. There's a lantern making workshop in one city. I'll show you later. There are student-led tours because students in Vietnam really want to improve their English. English is not that common in Vietnam, so they really want to learn English. So they offer free tours in their cities, which is really great. There's in most cities there are shows on offers which show traditional acrobatics or puppetry, music, dance, and they're really well made. It's not just like a shitty tourist trap. They're really, really well made. Then there are certain sightseeing tours that really focusing on subjects like history or market tours or craft tours or art tours, gallery tours, museum tours. Of course, there are cruises. Cruises is especially in Halong Bay and down in Mekong Delta in the south, something a lot of tourists do. You can do snorkeling and diving. It's not the best, like it's not like Philippines or Thailand, but it's pretty decent and it's nice. You can just chill by the beach. There are beautiful beaches in Vietnam. And you can visit national parks and do bird watching. There are a couple of primate, also like monkeys, like places where there are lots of different kind of monkeys. And you can do caving. So trekking into really interesting and beautiful caves. Either on a very easy cycling tour or getting really into the jungle and exploring caves. All right, quickly talking about, I mean, it's difficult to do that quickly because Vietnam has a very complicated climate and weather pattern. As I mentioned, it's very long and divided in 3 different regions because of the climate. And that is because all different regions, like the north is a typical weather how you would know it about Europe or China or the northern hemisphere, where you have 4 different seasons. So in the winter, it can get really cold, very gloomy, very foggy. And in the mountains, like I said, it can even snow. The summers get hot, which happens around May, June. Then there's a rain season. In the like summer, it rains also a lot, with the worst to come in July and August. But not so much as like a typical monsoon. It is really worse at that time because every year a couple of tropical storms can hit, what they call typhoons. You also have that in the Philippines. So that is a difficult time. Like it could happen when you travel at that time that you definitely could get inflicted into a tropical storm. Yeah, but the best time to travel basically the north would be either in spring or in fall. The winter is also okay, but you have to be prepared that it can get quite cold. I was once there when it was January and it was like going down to 5 degrees, and they said it snowed like just 30 kilometers outside of Hanoi. So that was just a crazy winter. That was of course exceptional, but it can happen. But yeah, the best times to go there are after August and before, like until December, and then again from February, beginning of February until April. Even May is okay because it doesn't get too hot. It gets hot, but not too crazy. So then you have Central, and Central Vietnam is it's a very curious thing because it does its entirely own thing. Over there, the rain season only starts at the end of August and lasts until January. So you can compare that to Tamil Nadu or the East Coast here in India. Then it can get really, really rainy over there, very like lots of rain and lots of flooding. So the best time to visit Central Vietnam is from February until August. And the springtime here, April, May, June, that time is actually perfect to go to the beaches. Not a strong current, warm, pleasant, and very nice. But there are a couple of places in Central Vietnam that I will talk about later. Actually, one place that is always crowded. It doesn't matter, even when it rains a lot, it gets a lot of crowd. So I would not really say that it influences the tourist season a lot. Then the south is more like India. The south has the dry season and the wet season. It rains from June to October, with the worst in July and August as well. And but the rest of the year, the temperatures are mostly the same. They're always between 26 and 35, somewhere in that area. And the rain, though, is not that inconvenient as in India or that unpredictable as in India. It mostly rains only once in the afternoon or in the evening, and people can really plan their day around the rains and know when they shouldn't get on a motorbike, basically. So it's not as crazy, and you can manage it. But if you want to avoid the rain, then don't go in July and August. So what is now the best month, the best time to visit Vietnam as a whole, if you want to see the entire country? That would be February, because in February it doesn't rain, it doesn't get too hot. It can get a little bit foggy and a little bit gloomy in the north, but it doesn't rain a lot, and it doesn't get too cold either. So not too hot, not too cold, and not too rainy. So perfect time to travel the entire Vietnam would be February and maybe beginning of March. Unfortunately, a lot of Western people people in the West have the perception of Vietnam that it's not really a good time to travel there in June and July, which is not 100% sure. I traveled there and I was myself really surprised how Like, first of all, there are not that many tourists, which is great. It doesn't rain too crazily. When I was in Ho Chi Minh City in the south in end of July, traveled until middle of August to the north, I had very little rain. It was overcast, but it never affected my travel much. There was a typhoon in the north while I was in central, so it can happen. I did not go to Halong Bay at that time, which would have been difficult, but everything else in the country is really nice. And the good thing about that time, June, July, and maybe beginning of August, is that the rice fields in the entire country are super green and even golden when it's just before the harvest. So it's the landscapes in the country are just gorgeous around that time. So it's something that I would recommend to people to do.
Adina, just quickly.
Yeah.
Since you mentioned about Feb and early March being the best time to visit, is it also the most crowded and
Yes,
time?
yes, and definitely. Sorry, yeah. Bye. It's definitely the most touristy time, but that starts already around December, which I realized lastly when I planned trips. That even though in Halong Bay, for example, it gets really gloomy and cold, there's still like so many people going there. So I think the tourism industry has managed it really well in Vietnam, that people visiting all around the year. But yeah, January, February, March is definitely one of the most touristy times. Yes.
Right. And like just like India, sometimes we're saying that August and September are great months. You're saying July and August are great months.
No, June and July.
June and July. Okay.
August, you get again, like you would get the rains already in central, and you would get rains in the south, and you would get rain in the north, and the typhoons in the north. So August is actually the worst month to go to Vietnam.
Okay, so June and July.
Yeah. Right. Then quickly, how long you should travel in Vietnam. I talk in a second about visa, and a couple of countries or nationalities can travel to Vietnam without getting a visa for a certain amount of time. So that's why these countries or these nationalities, for them, 15 days, 14 days are perfect. And they also want to use that entire time. So I think the ideal time to travel in Vietnam would be 15 days. However, if you have some people that want to do it quicker because either they combine it with other countries like Cambodia and Laos or Thailand, or if they just don't have a lot of time, like a lot of Indians unfortunately do, or Americans, then you can do the most exciting tourist destinations in 10 days also. But then you can only travel between the places by flights. You definitely have to take 1 or 2 flights for that, for sure. I mean, you can also just do a trekking trip and just focus on like one region. But if you really want to visit Vietnam only once in 10 days, then you have to do a lot of flying. And for me, ideally would be 21 days, but of course not a lot of people have time for that. So I think that the perfect time period is between 10 and 20 days. All right, quickly about visa and how you enter the country. Unfortunately, everything that I'm talking to you now is completely suspended at the moment because of Corona, but that just happens all over the world. They're considering of opening up again from the 1st of July, giving e-visas again. However, they have not really published yet, or like last time I checked, it was not published about what it would mean. Like, are there any tests? Are there any quarantine, etc.? So nothing I can talk much about this right now. But in the usual circumstances, you have 24 countries that don't need a visa to travel to Vietnam for 15 days. And that includes some of our main target audience in Germany, the UK, France, Spain, Italy, all the Scandinavian countries. Yeah, it does not include America for the obvious reason of the Vietnam War. It's basically showing them the finger a little bit. However, the Americans can get, as well as the Indians, can get e-visa. E-visa is very easy to get. It is a quick form that you fill out online. You get the visa for 30 days and it only costs 25 bucks. So when I traveled last year, I for the first time applied for an e-visa. It was really quick procedure. I got it by email and then you just show it at the entry. Yeah, that is definitely recommended for those who don't have the visa exempt and want to travel more than 15 days. There's also something called visa on arrival, which is not a really practical solution because you need a letter from an immigration officer. Travel agencies can arrange that, and that is definitely recommended for groups. So if you're a big group and just one person has to organize all the visa for the entire group, then just get from the travel agency the letter of approval, and then you can all travel there and get the visa on arrival. And it's also good for people that want to travel longer than 30 days. But other than that, I would always recommend rather to do the e-visa because it's just too much effort to get the visa on arrival. A couple of years, like when I actually first traveled to Vietnam, there were no e-visa, no visa free travel. And I had to apply at the consulate in my home country or in Thailand or Cambodia. That is still possible, but not necessary. It's just for the ones that want to travel really long. The enter points of Vietnam are three international airports, one in the south in Ho Chi Minh City, or as I said earlier, formerly Saigon. Then in Da Nang, which is in central Vietnam, close to Hoi An, and then in the north, Hanoi. These are the major three airports. And a lot of people only know about the big cities, Hanoi and Saigon. But actually our first Vietnam client that we had last year came from Bangalore, and she flew to Da Nang to start her trip in central Vietnam and then traveled north. So a lot of people don't know about this option, but it's definitely, depending on the time of the year, quite feasible and quite nice. And then there's an island in the south of Vietnam, off the coast of South Vietnam, that is called Phu Quoc, and that has its own rules. I'm not going to get too much into it because I also forgot a lot about it. But basically, if you travel to Phu Quoc from another country and also leave to another country and don't go to mainland Vietnam, all the nationalities of the world are visa exempt. So you don't need a visa to just visit that island if you're not planning to visit Vietnam afterwards or before. There are a couple of, so it basically also has an international airport, but only for a couple of countries like I think Kuala Lumpur and Singapore and probably Bangkok, but not a lot. So just a few airlines fly there. All right, like so.
Adina, just one quick one. Since you said like most of the European countries have visa exception for 15 days, but a lot of the Germans might be traveling for more than 15 days. So then they should just apply for the e-visa 30-day one, or it's easy to extend over there?
No, you can't extend that. You have to apply for an e-visa.
Okay.
As I said, it's so much easier than, for example, the Indian one. It's really a quick form. It takes 20 minutes. It's only $25 for everybody, and the visa is for 30 days. So it's an easy thing to do for sure.
Okay.
But for example, for the ones that want to combine Vietnam with other countries and just going to travel there for less than 15 days, that makes it so much easier because you don't have a lot of preparation. You just travel through the country and get out within 15 days, So that's perfect.
Got it.
Okay, so now let's talk about the best places to visit. You have, I'm going to start from the north, from the very north, and travel with you all the way to the south of Vietnam. So we have 3,000 kilometers to cover now. So we have the mountain area in the north. So this is close, there's a hill station called Sapa, which is close to the to the border to China. It's just really, really beautiful and famous for rice terraces and bamboo forests, greenery all over the place, similar to what we know in Vietnam about Da Chi or even Muna or Bayana. It's just very green and very rural. People go there to experience trekking, which you can do for multiple days also, where you stay in homestays. Or people go there to get to know about the tribal culture of Vietnam, because over there, the tribal, basically all the villages you find there are tribal villages. They're not Vietnamese people. Of course, you have nowadays Vietnamese people there living as well, because of tourism. But the traditional, the original people living in those mountains are tribes, mountain tribes. And they have very colorful clothes. They all make them at home, and they have their own languages and their own way of doing rice culture, and super interesting. And over there, you also have, again, like I mentioned before, the highest peak in Southeast Asia, which is the Fansipan mountain. I forgot now how high it is, but it's high, believe me. Then you can also do multi-day motorbike trips in the north, not just around Sapa, but the entire mountain areas. And those trips would start in Hanoi and also end in Hanoi and go to many places as well as Sapa. And I think Samir did that. So Samir, if you want to say for like 1 or 2 minutes something about that.
Well, I didn't really cover Sapa. I did the northern part of Vietnam, but not Sapa really.
I think I never know how to pronounce it. Hang Sha.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to remember the name, like Lang Song, Quang Yuan, Cao Bang, Ba Be Lake, those kind of places. didn't do Sapa, didn't have the time for it. But yeah, covered those bits, riding very close to the Chinese border. So yeah,
How
but
long,
just the northern part. Sorry,
how long was your motorbike trip?
the bike ride was about 11 days.
11 days, yeah.
Hmm.
So,
Just-
yeah.
So we started in Hanoi, went all the way up north, and then came to Hanoi. So start and end point was Hanoi.
But the landscape looked probably similar to what you see in the image, right?
Yeah.
So it's a very popular thing for tourists, especially the ones that have time to do motorbike tours up in the mountains, because the routes are beautiful, the roads are beautiful, the sights and the views. You have many homestays and B&Bs. It's not something that we know ourselves a lot, or we can organize ourselves, but we have travel agents to organize with, even the one that Samir did it with. So if people get in touch with us for that, we can help them organize that. And if Sapa is too touristy, it is a little bit touristy as a hill station, then people can also go for smaller destinations in the mountains like Mai Chao, Pulong, Haichang. So there are a couple of them. So depending on the kind of travelers they are, we can also recommend other places in Sapa. Sapa was basically, by the way, built or became a hill station through the French. So the French wanted to cool down in the mountains, and they built Sapa. So just the same way as it would have happened in India. Yep. So here you can see in an image the homestay that I stayed in. So you see I was in the middle of nowhere, and I actually had to walk down from the road with my luggage and go back to the road, which was like 1 kilometer at least, uphill, downhill. But it was definitely worth it because it's very secluded, very beautiful, nice food, very quiet, beautiful sky in the night, and good experience. And you could start trekking basically from there. And I did that also. Here just some impressions. This from Sapa downhill is basically a valley called the Muang Hoa Valley, which is a very long valley. And on one side is the Fansipan mountain, and on the other side some other really beautiful mountains. Fansipan is there in the back, there somewhere, but you can't see it because it's always in the clouds. And here you see the typical rice terraces. So these are one of the highest rice terraces. And I went, like I said, in the best time for that, because the mountains only have, because of the cold winters, only one rice harvest a year. And that happens after August. So this was when I got there, middle of August, they started slowly harvesting it. So the rice would turn from green to golden. And the entire time from June to end of August, beginning of September, is a beautiful time to see this really, like if you're into photography or you have clients into photography, this is the best place to go, or the best time to go. All right, then the next place south of Sapa would be Hanoi. Hanoi is the capital of Vietnam, not just politically, but also culturally. So universities are there, art scene, culture. Yeah, it's a very academic city as well. It has a long history, especially with the influence of the Chinese. As you know, it's close to the China border. So for the longest time, Hanoi was always occupied by Chinese powers. And you can see that all over the city. The most interesting area, and where most of the tourists stay and spend most of their time in, is the Old Quarter. So here you have lots of ancient houses and pagodas and temples. Pagodas is basically a form of a yeah, I hope I'm correct now, but pagoda can be a Buddhist temple, but also a Taoist or Confucius temple. So pagoda and temple are similar things. And the Old Quarter is divided in 36 streets that are all dedicated to a different guild. So you have a street just for tools, or a street just for food or something like that. So all the different streets have different crafts or different shops for it. Hanoi has a lot of museums, very interesting and very well-made museums, especially the one for women and ethnic minorities are really good. There are lots of temples all over the city and historical structures, which is the most important one is the mausoleum for Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh is what they call the father of the nation. He basically fought for independence and then fought off the French and Americans until he died in the late 60s, I think. I hope I'm not wrong now, but he's considered the big hero of independence for Vietnam. More political than spiritually. Then you have a lot of street food tours. You can do a beer tour. You can do you get to know the nightlife. There is a place called the Beer Corner where locals and tourists come together and drink typical beer that is only home in Hanoi. Hanoi is also famous because it's a connection point to Halong Bay, as well as the mountains in the north. So there's a night train that goes to Sapa in the north. What you see here in the picture is the train street, another famous site in Hanoi. It's basically what happened is very interesting. So the trains always, like basically the city built around the train tracks and came always closer. And tourists found it really curious to see how people could live so close to the tracks while the locals always lived that way. And soon the locals realized maybe we could make some money about these curious tourists and started to build cafes along the tracks. And now it's what's called the train street, where you have lots of cafes and bars on the side, very, very super close to the train track. Unfortunately, I think last year they shut it down because it's obviously dangerous. But I'm sure it's going to open again, and there's going to be ways or certain corners because it's very long stretch. So I'm sure you can experience that still, even from the main street or bridges close by. Yeah, getting to more pictures. In the center of the city is the Huan Kin Lake, which is a major landmark in the center of the city, and yeah, even for locals as well as tourists, it's the #1 landmark where even buses would stop that come from the outside. And locals, what is really, really cool to see is locals come there very early in the morning at 6 o'clock and do what they call a workout, which is just basically coming together with like your friends, especially older friends, and move a little, but it's more about giggling and dancing, and it's really fun to watch. I have a picture of that later as well. Here's a market that I visited at 4 a.m. in the morning. It's basically what you can compare with Crawford Market, fruit and vegetable market. Like I said, I went on a beer tour, which was really fun because like sometimes a little bit distant Vietnamese man became a little bit more open to talk with a little bit beer in this. So that was a fun tour. And then in the middle, I have some typical dish of Hanoi, which is called bun ja. It's pork with rice noodles and kind of vinegar sauce, and you eat it with lots of herbs and chilies, and it's absolute deliciousness if you eat pork. And then on the right hand side, you see the old ladies dancing to really, really loud music and funny movements, and everybody can join between 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. in the morning. That is close to the lake. Yeah. The next destination and #1 for everybody who visits Vietnam, if you're not going in July and August, is Halong Bay. Like I mentioned, it's basically a bay where there are thousands of towering limestones, islands, yeah, in the middle of in the water. But they're covered in rainforest, and also inside the towers or inside the islands, you find a lot of impressive caves, million-years-old caves, which are really gorgeous and really impressive. There are also hidden lagoons, so you would go under one of these, not under the island, but under a rock. There would be a little hole where you can go through with a boat or kayak, and you would be in a lagoon that you didn't expect would be there. So that's super fun. So you explore Halong Bay on a cruise. You can do a cruise for either 2 days or 3 nights, 2 days or 3 days. You could also do it in a 1-day trip. So go very early morning from Hanoi to Halong Bay, a journey that takes now only 3 hours because they have a new highway, and go on the boat around lunchtime and get off in the late afternoon and go back in the evening. It's a long day. But if you have the money, I would definitely recommend going on a 2 days cruise. 3-day cruise is also good, but for some might get a little bit boring. But if you have time and you have the money, you see more of Halong Bay. Because what a lot of people don't know, Halong Bay is actually 3 different bays. So there's the main Halong Bay, but there's also Lan Ha Bay and Bai Chu Long Bay. And all of them have, like some of them have really good caves. Some of them have more curious looking formations of the islands. Some have more authentic fishing villages because The traditional people that lived in Halong Bay are basically living on boats in clusters together and call them floating fishing villages. So if you have time and if you have the money, then definitely go for a cruise that explores more and that goes deeper inside, because on a day cruise, you're just surrounded by a lot of other cruises as well. It can get really crowded in Halong Bay. On the cruises, they're not like the houseboats in Kerala, because they have more cabins and have more people on it usually. So most of them have between 15 and 25 double bed cabins. You would have food all inclusive, as well as soft drinks, and probably also sometimes a couple of cocktails, but not hard liquor. There's at least one English speaking guide on the boat who explains a lot and shows, like, a lot of the islands look like certain animals. You have, for example, have the kissing roosters, and they point basically out these different formation, where there are caves and where there are lagoons, and you'd be on the sun deck during the daytime and they would show that. And a lot of these cruises also offer kayaking, so you can get the kayak from the boat and then go out. Other things you do on the cruise are they have morning Tai Chi lessons on the sun deck, or yoga, or you have karaoke. You visit caves, obviously, with the guide. You get off the boat and visit caves. You get to a viewpoint. So one of the images I show you in a second are taken from a viewpoint higher up. And yeah, lots of full program on these cruise ships. There's also a big island in the center of Halong Bay called Katpa Island, which has resorts on it and also cheaper hotel options. If people don't want to do a cruise because maybe they're get like seasick, but they still want to see Halong Bay, that could be an option. It's not the number one choice I would make, but it's possible, and it's also covered in rainforest, so good for trekking and good for views. So here you see it can get a little bit crowded in Halong Bay. They limited now the routes of the cruise ships to, don't know exactly, but I think they're around 10 different routes. So lots of cruises are going in the same direction from the start, from the coast into Halong Bay. You can see also in this picture, you have different sizes. So here's a bigger one, next to it is a smaller one. There are also cruises where only one cabin is there and like you would be alone, but that's very expensive. If you're like for Indian clients who maybe go as a family, you can book a cabin with a boat with just like 4 or 5 cabins. That's also possible. And there are actually affordable options as well. But yeah, the normal travelers and a couple would go on a cruise ship with up to 15 or 20 cabins. And you can see here, I always went in the winter to Halong Bay, either December, January, or February. And it was mostly overcast. I'm not sure, but I think I was there five or six times, and I only had one sunshine, and the other times it was mostly clouds with a little bit of sunshine. But it doesn't rain. It's just foggy, and it adds a little bit to the mythical characters. And I think Indians actually really like that weather. Yeah, here is one of the caves. It's not a really good picture, but the caves are really impressive and very nice maintained. With like paths that going through, so the actual formations are protected. Right, then next we go to the Halong Bay of the land, because the landscape is similar, but it's not in the sea, it's on land. This area is called Ninh Binh. Ninh Binh is a major city close by in the region.
Adina,
yeah?
Sorry, just for Halong, I just had a few questions quickly. One is, if someone's doing a 2 or a 3 night stay, then would they be able to go to the less touristy part, like, or even would?
Yeah, so I recently did a lot of research on cruises, and I found out that actually a lot of providers are now offering routes that I have not heard of before, and I have not visited on the cruise ships that I did. So there are definitely some options. If you have a little bit more money, you can go to cruise ships that do really interesting routes, where you can even get off and do a little bit of cycling. You visit the Feather Caves. There's one place where you can even do snorkeling. So yes, if you had the money, you can get on off the beaten route. And the one, I forgot now the name, wait. The Bai Tu Long Bay, the third one of the bays, is also something that not a lot of people go to.
Okay, so it's expensive, but if you find the right tour operator and they're willing to pay the price, you can do it.
Yes, yes.
And just a rough estimate, do you know off your head, like it's about 10,000 per person per day, no? If it's overnight with meals and everything.
10,000 is around 150.
150.
I would say between I would probably roughly say 1400 per person, 14,000 per person. So $200 around. It's expensive. It's nothing cheap.
Okay, but this you're saying, if say there's a couple sharing a cabin, then it's a 14,000.
That is like 200 for the cabin. Yeah, sorry, I was wrong with that.
Okay,
So
okay.
200 for the cabin. Yes.
Okay, so it's actually kind of like houseboat prices a little more, and again it includes meals and all activities and things like that.
And a lot of these cruises even include the transfers from, or they all have offered transfers from Hanoi and back, but some of them even included in the overall price.
Okay, and if
So
someone,
this is shared transport in a minivan with the other passengers.
and if you don't want to do the entire journey from Hanoi and reach a day earlier, can you stay around? How long is it worth it? And
Not recommended because the city there is a very industrious city and full of Chinese casinos. And
Okay.
the coastline is not beautiful. They're not nice beaches or anything. You don't even see most of the times Halong Bay from the coast because it's a little further inside. So when it's gloomy weather, you don't see it much.
okay,
So
okay,
it's not recommended. You could do it, but then probably stay rather in Katba Island for a night. But yeah, I haven't heard of that option.
and
Most of the people travel from Hanoi or Ninh Binh, where we are right now, to Halong Bay. And you can there is an airport in Halong Bay that you can fly out from. But most travel agents offer to go back to Hanoi. It's probably cheaper that way.
okay. Got it. And final question, when you said the day trip, because I'm just thinking of like our backpackers, so like the houseboat, is there like a day trip option where you don't have the entire massive cruise boat? Is it much cheaper, or you're still going to pay around 14,000 between two people for the...
It's much cheaper. I think you would pay per person. You can spend less than $100 on that, so less than 8,000 or something per person on this,
Okay.
including meals, including transport, Hanoi back and forth. So it's a 15-hour or like 12 to 15 hours trip, I guess, depending on traffic. You see a lot of it. You also visit a cave. You also visit a floating fishing village. You also can do kayaking or a boat, like a small boat ride. You see a little bit interesting parts of Halong Bay, but you see what every tourist sees, basically.
Okay, so they have a package catered for backpackers at around
You have
100.
lunch. You get lunch. You get a little bit of a coffee or tea thing. You get the transfers, and you get to be on the sun deck and just see the entire thing together with the guide.
But honestly, I feel, Adina, that doing a day thing is just, I mean, I personally would not recommend it because when you stay at least one night, there's so much more you do in the morning. Early morning, you go to the cave, you check up the mountain, things you do.
Yeah.
Maybe when you stay for a night. One day would be extremely rushed, I feel.
Yeah.
I think it'd just be a waste of time. It'd be like you want to just take it off your list.
I agree. I have done both. I have done day trips and I have done overnight. And I definitely enjoyed the overnight more because it went further in where I found the karst formations more interesting and more dense and more unique in shape.
Right.
And I saw better caves and I visited a viewpoint that we didn't do on the day trip. So yes, it's more, but some people can just probably not afford it.
Exactly. Like a solo backpacker traveling alone still wants to experience Halong.
Honestly, if I can convince them, I would tell them just skip Halong Bay because you get the similar landscape and more experiences in Ninh Binh, which I'm going to talk about now.
Got it. Okay, done. Thanks.
So Ninh Binh is 2 hours south of Hanoi, easily reachable by train or bus or car. It has, like I said, a similar landscape than Halong Bay, and you have two places, Tam Kok and Trang An, where you can take boat rides into the landscape. So basically, when you take these boat rides, you quickly get into a place where there are no villages, there are no nobody lives there. It's completely like inside the countryside, and you go even under the rocks again into an entirely new landscape. So it's a very unique experience. And those are tourist run places, so you can't take your own kayak or your own boat. You're definitely on a boat with a local rowing the boat. Close by are also a lot of other sites, like an ancient city, Hualu Ancient City. One emperor basically built himself a huge royal enclosure there. You have the biggest pagoda in Vietnam, the Bai Dinh Pagoda. There are lots of national parks and nature reserves close by, and a couple of smaller sites, like a cathedral, smaller pagodas. There's a lot to do in 2 or 3 days. If you're into nature, and if you're cycling around or taking a motorbike and just driving around yourself. It's a beautiful place, and you will see that in the pictures now. I cycled around the entire area for 2 days. So this is in Tam Kok. I took a boat ride. That was the first boat ride I did. And the fun thing here is the locals do the rowing entirely by foot. And the rowing lady that I had was above 70, as you can see in the picture. And I felt super bad. But at the same time, I was probably a good deal for her because I was alone and all the other boats were filled with lots of people. So I think she was happy, but I felt really, really bad. But they just assigned them to you. You didn't have a choice. And you can see here, basically, it's going on the river. On the sides, you have rice fields, which were at that time when I was there green. And then the high mountains go up.
Interrupt.
Sorry?
John is logged out. Can somebody add him? John is logged out. Can you add him in, or who can add him in?
But I don't have any. I think he has to come and then I can accept him, no?
No, there's no. You can just. He's back. Anyone? No, there's no waiting.
Joy has to be here. Joy is so excited about it.
Yeah.
Joy, I'm going to talk more about food later, okay?
I will okay.
So yeah, so you can see here basically it's these high mountains next to rice fields, next to a river where you would take the boat and just look around. And like I said, I cycled around the landscape a lot, as you can see here in the picture. The small picture is of a smaller pagoda, but that gate that you see in the picture in front of the lotus field is a very popular Instagram location for photos. So a lot of these couple shots are happening here. This is one of the accommodations that I visited there, super secluded, in the middle of nature, very far from civilization. This is an accommodation that I would not actually give because the service was not that good, but I want to show like how secluded these kind of accommodations in the middle of the lotus fields can be, and it's basically a nature's lover's paradise for sure. This is the Trong An, so the other place where you can take boat rides. Here, in that landscape complex, there are a couple of old structures that are associated with that ancient city that I talked about. They have old temples, old houses built in the Chinese architecture style. And also, which is really cool is here you have the place where they shot King Kong. Yeah, King Kong Island, what they call. So you're on that island and you can definitely see yourself in this landscape that if you have seen King Kong, like it looks just like there in the movie. And the water is super clear, super blue. When the sun hits on it, it gets like this emerald kind of turquoise color. Very nice. This is a viewpoint that I went up to at 6 a.m. in the morning. My legs were hurting, but it was worth the view, as you can see. And the other side, this is where I took the boat ride on the first day. The first image with the old lady you saw, which is basically down here, and you're surrounded by this beautiful landscape. Next place, now we're traveling south. If you would travel from Hanoi, Ninh Binh to Phong Nha, you can either do that by night train for 8 hours, by night bus, or by flight to the airport that's 45 minutes from Phong Nha in Dong Hoi. Phong Nha is famous. There's actually a national park there, which is called the Phong Nha Kebang National Park, and it has the biggest cave in the world, which is called the Songdong Cave. It's also called, Phong Nha is also considered the adventure capital of Indochina because over there you can do a lot of different adventure activities like caving. Caving is basically going into all of these different caves, trekking. You can do that by kayak, by walking, you can do rock climbing. There are also just a couple of places where you don't have to travel really far or trek very far, where you can kayak on the river. A lot of people do just mountain bike tours around the national park. So again, a nature's paradise and a lot of adventures you can do. And people would go there probably to do a 1 day, 2 day, or 3 days trek into the jungle and into the caves. And there are three providers that do that in a super professional and safe manner. Like I was really impressed how professional these providers for the treks were. Phong Nha is also famous, first of all, for being the most narrowest point of Vietnam, and it's close to where what they call the DMC, the demilitarized zone. So here was the border between North Vietnam, which was run by the communists, the socialist Vietnamese that wanted independence. And the South was at that point still run by the French and American. And during the Vietnam War that lasted multiple decades, this was where most of the battles would happen, because this was the border. And of course, the North Vietnamese wanted to travel south, the South Vietnamese wanted to travel north and take each other over. So this was an area that was bombarded a lot, destroyed a lot, where the locals suffered a lot. And yeah, I get to show this also in the next destination a little bit. So the DMZ, the border between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, was in Phong Nha, close to Phong Nha. Not in Phong Nha, but close to it. This is an area, again, central Vietnam, difficult with the rain season from September to January. I was there in August, only had a couple of showers, but they said it will probably rain very soon, and then they will have to stop all trekking and caving activities because the caves get flooded. This I want to quickly show you the accommodation I stayed in Phong Nha, which was my favorite during the entire trip. First of all, because of the pool. The pool was really nice. It's like shaped like a boat. But also it's in the middle of nature, but still you can cycle quickly into the city, not city center, in the village center of Phong Nha. It was kept really, like they have an organic vegetable farms, they have all the animals there, there are lots of puppies, lots of cats, very back to the roots, but in the same time, good comfort and good service. So Wen Chek, my favorite accommodation in entire Vietnam. Yeah, I was there, like I said, just before the rain started. The rice turned golden, which makes a really nice view. And I just cycled around everywhere. On a day trip to one of the caves called the Dark Cave. It's called the Dark Cave because the further you go in, you get to a point where there's no light coming from anywhere anymore. And when you switch off your torch, it's completely pitch black. And over there is a little mud bath, and you go there and it's supposed to be, the mud is supposed to be really mineral rich and good for your skin. And the fun way of visiting that cave is you zip line to the start of the cave, and then you swim inside. And inside the cave, you only get out, and then you walk a little bit more and get to the mud bath. And outside of that cave, you see this area here, the river, where there is a little water park. So here you can zip line again to the water and climb up there, and there's islands on the water, and you just spend basically 1 or 2 hours just like in the water and kayak, and good fun, good fun. And in the entry price included is also a lunch. So it's just zip lining, lunch, cave, water park, best half day, good fun. This is one of the caves called the Paradise Cave. Paradise Cave is really cool because it is easily accessible for everybody, even the ones that can't trek. There are a couple of stairs you have to climb up to, but most people that don't have any problems with their hips or foot or something, like not maybe the oldest, but normal people, everybody can visit it. And it's, I have a couple of interesting facts on that. It's 31.4 kilometers long. It has a width ranging from 30 meters to 100 meters. And at its widest point, it's 150 meters. And the highest point is 80 meters. So in the height, it can go up to 80 meters. So the fun thing is, if you see that image on the right-hand side, the small image, that is a tiny little entry. So just imagine that person that climbed up a mountain in the middle of the forest and sees, oh, there's a hole, I should check it out, goes inside and sees a massive, massive, huge cave, and was the first person to ever discover that. Must be the most amazing feeling, I guess. It's called Paradise Cave because of the really cool formation that you have inside. And oh yeah, what I didn't mention earlier, super interesting on why Phong Nha is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's the oldest, I don't want to get that wrong, I wrote it down. The oldest karst mountains in Asia, which are 400 million years old. So there are not a lot of mountain or nature and caves that are that old, 400 million years. Yeah. And this is a river that runs through the village. It's really a small village. Tourism has just started a couple of years there. So it's still off the beaten path, not too touristy, very good fun. And this is what they say is the biggest cave in the world, the Song Dong cave. I hope I say it correctly. It's the biggest cave by cross section. Not 100% sure what that means, but that's what Wikipedia says. It's not easy to visit. It takes 5 days to get there. The trek costs $3,000 and they only limit the amount of people that can trek there per year to, I think, like around 1,000. Or it's actually 4 days long, not 5 days, 4 days long trek. And yeah, since it's very expensive, not a lot of people do it, but if you do it, it's probably a once in a lifetime experience. It's especially famous for the cave roof collapses that you see here in the picture. There are 2 of them, and because that happened so long ago, inside the cave you have a rainforest and its own climate and like a kind of insects and plants that you don't have on the outside. So it's super unique place. And you can see in the picture here on the bottom and as well as up there how small the humans are, because that cave is just so big.
Have you been here?
No. Like I said, it's $3,000 to get there. I didn't have them. No, like I said, they're also it's only for really experienced trekkers and cavers, because the trek to get there is difficult, moderate to difficult, and they only like take experienced trekkers to go there. And 4 days. It takes 4 days.
They even do cave diving here, right?
Yes, but I think that is only like there's the British Cave Association and they do all that exploration. Mm-hmm. So even in this, like every year they say they come up with a longer, like they come up with a new number of lengths of the cave, because they swim a little bit more, they dive a little bit more and see, oh, there's another cave, oh, there's another cave. So the whole system becomes longer and longer.
Nice.
And then there's also another, in the Phong Nha National Park, there's also the 3rd largest cave. So they have really, really big records there in that place. And that is a really cool place also because you can camp inside the cave, and it's a really cool experience with a lot of, not bats, swallows. What are these birds called? I think swallows. They're all like all over the ceiling of the cave. Next place. This is now 5 hours south of Phong Nha, a city called Hue. So the last 2 places were about nature, and then this place is all about the culture and the history. Already the drive from Phong Nha to Hue is really interesting because you experience a DMZ, the demilitarized zone, and if you have a guide with you who can show you the different places, then you will learn a lot about the Vietnam War. And there's even a tunnel system that you can visit where the locals during the Vietnam War lived entirely for weeks and months on end underground to protect themselves from the bombardment that happened constantly. So they lived entirely in a tunnel system under the ground, and you can visit that now. So the journey of like that would usually only take 4 hours, you can do in 7 hours by just visiting a lot of sites on the way. Hue is famous because it used to be the royal seat of an empire called the Nguyen Empire, which was for 150 years the royal family in power over a huge area of Vietnam. They built inside the city a palace called the Imperial City, which is a huge enclosure. Like it's actually the citadel enclosure, and inside the citadel is the Imperial City, where they have their palaces, the ladies area, a royal theater, beautiful architecture basically. Unfortunately, it was very destroyed during the Vietnam War, as this was so close to the DMZ, but they're renovating it now and building it up again, and still a place worth visiting. Close by are also very unique to these Nguyen emperors was that they all were really into their tombs and their gravestones. So they just didn't build like it's basically like what you know from the Taj Mahal. They basically build themselves and their wives and their kids these huge tombs that you can visit all over the countryside, and that just have very unique artistic features to them. There's also a beautiful pagoda, the Tin Mu Pagoda, and through the city and the countryside runs a perfume river, named after the perfume trade that happened here centuries ago. And it's well connected to the next destination, which is one of the most popular destinations called Hoi An. This is the citadel, the Imperial City. Here you can see the art, very Chinese influence, lots of pearl and marble and ceramics, a lot of materials from abroad as well. Those were really rich emperors. I wanted to show you this quickly because in the picture on the left-hand side, you see a bunker from the wartime. And in the other one, a local told me once, he was a kid during the Vietnam War. He was sitting on one side of the river hiding in the bushes and watching for days on end a battle that would happen on the other side. Of course, under the risk of being bombarded, but they anyways lived most of their childhood with that risk. So he was just sitting at the river and watching a brutal battle on the other side. And also these trees that you see in these pictures, they're all just like 20 years old, because they all had to be planted again, because in the Vietnam War they used something called Agent Orange, which was a chemical that they spread all over Vietnam to destroy the forest, so that they can find the hiding spots of the Vietnamese. So the entire in Phong Nha, as well as where in the entire area in between, there were almost no forests left after the Vietnam War. It ended in '76, by the way. And there's also a fun place that I visited for an hour called, it's an abandoned water park. So this used to be a theme and water park, and now it's abandoned, but the structures are still there, and it's quite fun to just walk around there. And you just have to bribe the guy at the entry, the security guy, and walk around there and take fun pictures. All right, then when you go from Hue to Hoi An, the next destination, the journey itself is an experience. And a lot of people do that either by private car or they go on a motorbike trip, which I did. So there's something called Easy Rider, where you basically pay a motorbike driver and your luggage goes on the back and you're the co-passengers, and you can enjoy the landscape and the journey. And they do that, a lot of tourists do that, especially on that trip, because first of all, it's not too long. You can do it in a day. And secondly, because it's really gorgeous in landscape. So I visited on the way this beautiful beach called the Lang Co Beach, where I had a delicious lunch. You can swim in the waters, and it's very unspoiled and long and beautiful. And below you see a picture of the Elephant Springs, which is a local water hole where the locals go. I went there during the summer holidays of the school summer holidays, so lots of kids were there and families. And it's a really fun place in the middle of the mountains where water streams down from the mountain in cascades, and there are lots of water holes, and people come with their own picnics. Super fun place. And yeah, this is the Hai Van Pass. So basically you go over a mountain between, like first it's flat, then you go on a mountain called the Hai Van Mountain, and on the other side is Da Nang and Hoi An. And this is also a place where the weather changes. So sometimes when it rains in Hue, there's sunshine in Hoi An, or when it rains in Hoi An, there's sunshine in Hue, and the weather changes here. And on the top of that mountain is also a French bunker, so you still have the remains of the war as well. Here's the road. It basically, by the way, became famous as this motorbike trip because of the TV show Top Gear. I mean, maybe you have heard about it, but Top Gear made it famous as the #1 motorbike journey in Vietnam. This was me and my driver sitting at the beach and having this delicious seafood lunch. I can still taste it, so good. All right, next is Hoi An. Hoi An is next to Ha Long Bay, probably the most popular tourist destination in Vietnam. It is an exceptional, well-preserved former trading port. So a lot of Chinese, Japanese, even Indians, and then later even French and Dutch and Portuguese set up here their trade points. So it was really open for all kinds of people from the world to set up here their trade. And the entire old town, the entire old part of the town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and you have to pay entry to get there. So it's not just like particular sites where you pay entry. At the old quarter on the outside, there are entry points where you pay money to enter for a couple of days. It gets really, really crowded in the old town, like because it's so charming and because Da Nang is close by with an international airport, and Korea just got last year their direct flight connection, so the city is full of Koreans. But it is charming, it is really beautiful. It has a lot of boutique cafes, boutique restaurants, tailors, stores, so it's really famous for getting your own clothes tailored there. And there are lots of activities you can do in and outside of Hoi An. The cooking classes are popular, bicycle tours are popular, the beach close by, so even a couple of days just chilling at the beach is possible. There's snorkeling sites, really good marine life, and further away there are even more sites like the Marble Mountain. There are two small mountains entirely made of marble with temples inside and on the top, where I did even once abseiling. So where you just like, abseiling is where you go from the top of the rock, you just like go on a rope down into the caves or into the temple even. My son are Hindu temples. There are Hindu temples in Vietnam. Super interesting, and I think a couple of our Indian clients would appreciate visiting that. There's Da Nang, which is a huge city close by, very good nightlife. And there is the famous Golden Bridge, which I'm going to show you in a minute. It's just a 1 or 1.5 year old bridge that has become Instagram famous. Is that everything I wanted to mention? Yeah. So it's a destination where I would recommend definitely 3 nights because there's so much to do. And even though you're probably through with the old town in half a day, the countryside, the beaches, and the options around are worth it, making it worth a 3-day destination. Yeah, this is the old town. So you can compare it a little bit with Kochi or the old part of Goa or Pondicherry. It's well preserved, and the UNESCO status definitely makes it even more preserved and maintained. This is the countryside. Always did bicycle tours and recommend also bicycles young, and you even get to do this fun little conical boat ride and learn how to do that and learn about the aquaculture and rice and just cycle through the beautiful countryside with good guides, very good guides. Here a lot of people speak English because it's so touristy. It's a lantern town also, so you have lantern making workshops and the lantern night market where you can buy them. As I said, I did a cooking class here, which is highly recommended. And the first cooking class I heard of where you in advance decide what you want to cook and then go to the market and buy the ingredients for what you chose to cook and then make that. So super fun. And I did it with some kids, so it's definitely a child-friendly destination as well. But here, yeah, you can see the negative side of Hoi An. It gets really, really crowded. This is close to the most famous site of Hoi An, the Japanese Bridge. Gorgeous site, gorgeous little bridge, but it gets just so crowded, so crowded. And yeah, this is 60 kilometers away from Hoi An in the mountains in a theme park called the Bana Hills. So they also have like roller coasters and stuff. And they recently built this bridge, which has become really famous for how it looks, but also the view over the landscape. This is something I think a lot of Indians will ask for and already did. All right, then we travel all the way south. This is now skipping a lot of central Vietnam and getting all the way to South Vietnam to Ho Chi Minh City. Ho Chi Minh City was formerly known as Saigon during the French occupation until the country was reunified in '76, and it was named after the father of the nation, Ho Chi Minh City. It was also the capital of the French Indochina. So Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, when they were all one French empire, Saigon was kind of the capital of it. It is now the economic center, the modern center, with a lot of old charms. But if you get there first, you definitely only see the modern parts of it, and it's just like Mumbai. You take a little bit longer to see the old charm of it. It has definitely a lot of sites to get to know about the Vietnam War. There is the War Remnants Museum, a must-do, and gets a lot of tourists every day. The Cuchi tunnels, it's another tunnel system where the Vietnamese lived and fought underground to hide from the Americans, and you can experience it now and learn about that, which is around 45 minutes outside of Ho Chi Minh City. A lot of people here choose to do a day trip into the Mekong Delta, which is south from there. I'm going to talk about that in a second. There's a really good nightlife and the best street food scene in Vietnam. Definitely the most variety and the best street food and restaurant scene as well in entire Vietnam. Lots of cafes, live music. It's just a very modern city, but it's also more expensive than other destinations. And here I would definitely recommend a tour with a motorbike or a Vespa, because the city is so full of motorbikes. The best way to explore is to just get on one as well as a co-passenger and either do it on a street food tour, on a sightseeing tour, on a nightlife tour, but definitely get on a motorbike here. So you see lots of skyscrapers. Also has the highest skyscraper in Vietnam now. This is a photo from the Vespa tour that focuses on street food, but also you visit 2 live music shows and you sit on the back and enjoy a beer. So can't get cooler than that. And the guides and the drivers are fun, but it's expensive. It's expensive. These are the Cuchi tunnels. So like I said, this was a large, it's a small part of a large network of tunnels that underlay much of the country. And the Viet Cong, which were the guerrilla fighters that fought the Americans, that were basically using this as hiding spots, but also supply routes, hospitals even, and living quarters. And they were really, really small, really narrow, and it's just unbelievable when you visit, like how people could live there for months on end. Yeah. The last destination is the Mekong Delta. This is the most southern area of Vietnam. As I said before, it's the rice bowl, or also the biological treasure trove of Vietnam, where most of the agriculture and rice harvest comes from. It has many destinations for tourists, like the city Can Tho, Cai Be, or Ben Tre, where you find resorts in the middle of the nature, even homestays. And you would not visit for the city experience, you would visit definitely for the nature experience. So you choose a place in the middle of nature. It's just like in the backwaters in Kerala. But most people would probably choose, out of time constraints, a day trip from Ho Chi Minh City, which is good enough. It depending on how much you spend on it, and if you do a group tour or private tour, it can get a little bit boring, because what happens is you drive 1.5 hours into Mekong Delta, then go on a boat ride on the river, visit an island where there's a candy factory, like they make candy out of coconut. You have a dance show, you have lunch, you do a little bit of a bicycle ride, and then go on a small boat ride through the small canals in the nature. You see an image of that in a second. And you visit fruit plantations, and then you drive back. So I don't know, for young people, maybe a little bit boring, but for the older audience, it's worth it. For the young people that have time, the backpackers, I would rather say, go down into Mekong Delta with a bus ride of 3 hours, stay a night, visit the floating markets, which is there in Can Tho, and just take your own bicycle and ride around and do it on your own. This is the floating market in Can Tho. Can Tho is not done on a day trip. That's too far south of Ho Chi Minh City. It's 3 hours, I think, 3 or 4 hours. But if you're there, there are nice hotels, nice little homestays, and you can visit this floating market, which is a cool site. You see, it looks like a lot like in the backwaters. This is close to the homestay where I stayed, the second picture. And the first picture is the boat ride on the day trip. So you go into these palm groves and small waterways and ride through it. Just quickly, 4 more destinations that are popular but not worth now getting into. Dalat, which is a hill station north of Ho Chi Minh City, 4 hours. Popular amongst domestic tourists for just its cool temperatures, because the south gets hot. So they go there to cool down a little bit. But you can do a lot of good trekking. There are coffee plantations, canyoning. So a typical hill station destination. And second is Nha Trang. Nha Trang is actually a perfect beach destination because it has always good weather. It doesn't get a lot of rain. It has the best marine life. You can snorkel, you can dive, beautiful beaches. But unfortunately, the Chinese and the Russian tourists kind of destroyed the vibe. There are lots of skyscrapers, casinos. Nature is completely destroyed. You don't see any palms anymore. And there's even crime. There's a Russian mafia. So it's sad because it could have been a really nice place. Because also the mountains, as you can see in the back a little bit, maybe the mountains are close by. And there's even this thermal mud bath, which is really good for your skin and for your health. But yeah, unfortunately, it would only recommend it to backpackers who don't want to fly too much, because then you can go from Ho Chi Minh City to Nha Trang and then next to Hoi An without flying. Then the island in the south with the visa exemptions for all nationalities called Phu Quoc. Perfect beach destination when people want to finish off their trip with 5 to 6 days beach time. I would definitely give this place. Full of resorts along the beaches. Can get a little touristy, but you can choose a resort that just has its own little secluded beach. And the rest of the island is a national park where you can even do trekking. And oddly, it's famous for fish sauce production. Then you have Mui Ne. Mui Ne is 5 hours north of Ho Chi Minh City at the coastline. Has very strong currents and wave, and that's why it's famous for kite surfing and windsurfing. But it also has close by really big sand dunes where you can do sandboarding and quad biking. And there's also a couple of yoga retreats. So this is more of a place for the young backpackers who don't want to just chill at the beach, but rather experience a little bit more. And also, yeah, you can travel from there. You can travel Ho Chi Minh City, Dalat, then to Mui Ne, and then further up north. if you're a slow traveler. Quickly, how can you travel in Vietnam? I want to here show in pictures 4 different modes. The first one is the motorbike, as I mentioned earlier, easy rider option, where you sit on the back. Unfortunately, the drivers don't speak English much. In general, drivers in Vietnam don't speak a lot of English. But if you're a bigger group or if you're a family, you can have one of the drivers be a guide as well. They offer that service for a little bit more, and then they can explain to you the different sites on the way. My driver didn't speak much English, but we communicated fine. And I paid $50 US, or around 3,500 rupees for 7 hours journey, where, like I said, we visited a lot of places. And you can do that even in other parts of Vietnam on longer journeys as well. The second is bus. So the overnight bus, sorry, I just closed my window because it gets a little loud. The buses are interesting because it's basically 3 rows next to each other of bunk beds. So you have on the both window sides bunk beds of 2 beds above each other, and then in the middle as well. It gets a little narrow, but if you're a small person like me, it was really comfortable. They're reclining chairs, so you can put them in entirely flat to sleep, but you can also put them up to look out of the window. Your luggage goes into a bunk, of course, below, but for your hand luggage, there is a little box at the end of your feet where your feet go in, but there's also a little bit space to put your bag, your small bag. And you remove your shoes at the by entering the bus and put them in a plastic bag, which keeps the entire bus really, really clean. So that's fantastic. Those buses are usually really clean and nice. You get a blanket, a water bottle. They stop very often for toilet breaks. There's one person that you can communicate with in English. So it's cheap, it's good for backpackers and budget travelers, perfect way to travel. Then the next options are sleeper trains. Basically, Vietnam built this, after the reunification of North and South, they built this long track journey between Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi. That journey would take 36 hours. So of course, we're not giving this to anybody. But on the way, there are lots of smaller journeys on that you can take. So for example, popular is between Hue and Hanoi, or between Hanoi and Sapa, just 8 hours. And these night trains in the 4-berth compartments are fantastic. Like, really good beds, clean sheets, you get tea, you get coffee, you get bananas for breakfast, you get free water bottles, the toilets are good, there are wash basins outside of the toilet, so nothing compared to like a third AC in India. They're really, really good trains. But they can also cost between, in those 4 berths, they cost between 30 and 80 US dollars depending on it. These trains have also sometimes luxury compartments attached that are privately run by private companies. So the train is run by the state, but the attachment is run privately, and they're really, really good, really, really good trains. So an authentic journey, in my opinion, should have a train journey overnight in that as well. But yeah, most people would probably choose to travel by flight because of the long distances between cities. And if you want to see the country really quickly, you want to fly. And there is the main airline is Vietnam Airlines, and the only one I would use because the cheap airlines are not reliable. There's Bamboo Airlines and Vietjet, and I would not use them because the prices are also not that much of a difference. And Vietnam Airlines has between the major destinations almost a flight every hour. I looked up, for example, now for the 30th of June between Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, north and south, and it was just 4,800 rupees. And these flights happen every hour, and they're really affordable. Of course, it's not environmentally friendly to travel that way, but in Vietnam, you don't have much of an option. Of course, there is also the option of traveling by car and driver. As I said, since I don't speak a lot of English, for our comfort and luxury clients, I would book additionally a guide who would come with you and explain you a lot of things and see sites with you on the way. But since most of the distances between the major destinations are so long, you don't really use car and driver a lot. And the multi-day car options in Vietnam are very expensive. And I would rather recommend you, for example, if you only travel in the north of Vietnam, you would take car and driver only between the destinations, but then in the city itself, you would rather do certain sightseeing or activities instead of opting for a driver for multiple days, because you get the same service, but you pay less for that. And since there's so many activity providers and so many sightseeing options, it's a better way to do it for sure. So it's not same way as organized in India, where you with one vendor, you organize car, driver, and guide. You would do that more separately. The last bit is I want to introduce you to quickly to 3 different routes. The first one is a quick route, 10 days, with the major sites of Hanoi, Halong Bay. From Halong Bay, you would travel quickly back to Hanoi to fly down to Hoi An. The airport of Hoi An is called Da Nang, so the big city close by. And then from there, you would fly to Ho Chi Minh City. That's 2 nights in Hanoi, 1 night in Halong Bay for the cruise, 3 nights in Hoi An, because you reach in the evening and then have 2 full days. And then you spend another 3 nights in Ho Chi Minh City, which is the last departure day. So 2 full days, of which 1 you would probably do a day trip to Mekong Delta. You can do this trip in all budgets because flights, like I said, are affordable. There are hostels everywhere, B&Bs as well as luxury and boutique options. Many activities, so the trip can be very diverse from destination to destinations, but you can only travel by flight. There's no other options. Another route, popular probably for the European audience, because it has it's 14 days long and it has a couple of more destinations. And this is a route also that I would recommend for February to August, because in the south it gets, after April, May, it gets hot and then rainy. So you might want to avoid that to not like melt, and you can visit the north where it's not too hot and it doesn't rain yet. North and central Vietnam. So you travel from Hanoi to Halong Bay again, then to the Halong Bay of the land, Ninh Binh. Then by night train or night bus or flight, you go to Phong Nha, and from there travel to Hue and Hoi An. So if you do the night train, which you can even do as a luxury and comfort traveler, because as I said, there are like these extensions to the trains that are super luxurious. You can do this entire trip without any flight, so it's also more environmentally friendly. And this is a trip for nature's lovers because most of the destinations, Halong Bay, Ninh Binh, Phong Nha, even around Hoi An, is more about nature. And you can even extend this if you want to have a couple of relaxing days. You can extend at the end a couple of beach days close to Hoi An. So you could spend 2 nights or 3 nights in close to the old quarter or the old city of Hoi An, and then spend a couple of days in a resort close to the beach, which is just 30 minutes car ride away. So similar to Alipi and Maurari. Yeah, this is also possible again, all the different budgets. And there is also a flight option. You can travel back from Ninh Binh to Hanoi to the airport directly, and then fly down to Dong Hoi, which is just 45 minutes from Phong Nha. But for me, it sounds easier to just take from Ninh Binh directly to Dong Hoi, a night train, and then just take in the early morning 40 minutes car ride to Phong Nha, and you're there in the night. Even as a luxury traveler, the night train journey is 8 hours. And yeah, then I wanted to quickly show you, I mean, I could probably talk, there are way more route options for Vietnam itself. There's also a route just for South Vietnam in the winter if you want to avoid the cold weather in the north, or just central or the mountains in the north, but then we would talk ages. So I rather wanted to show you as a third route an option that might be a lot of people interested in, especially if you travel really far from Canada or America all the way to Southeast Asia. You don't have a lot of holiday and you know you're not going to come back. You probably want to do all 4 countries of Indochina or Southeast Asia together. So you would start your trip in Bangkok, which anyways has the most busy international airport. Travel from Bangkok to Siem Reap. Siem Reap, talk about in the next presentation about Cambodia, famous for the Angkor Wat temple. Travel to the capital of Cambodia, Phnom Penh. From there, you can either fly or take a day bus to Ho Chi Minh City. Then start from South Vietnam and travel north to Hoi An by flight. Then fly again to Halong Bay, Hanoi, either to Hanoi and then travel to Halong Bay or directly to Halong Bay. Travel by car back to Hanoi. Then fly to Laos, to Luang Prabang. Vietnam Airlines flies there very cheap. Luang Prabang is a beautiful destination in Laos in the mountains on the Mekong River. Also about nature, but also about Buddhism. Gorgeous place, definitely a 3 days destination. Then you can fly to Chiang Mai, which is in the north of Thailand, in the mountains. Also famous for elephants and responsible elephant tourism. And there's also an option, if you have more time, you can travel on a cruise from Luang Prabang close to Chiang Mai on a 2 day journey on the river, which is something that our clients wanted to do, that wanted to travel in October to the region. Probably now we'll cancel that trip, but that is something that we booked for them. And
But
then
Adina, that would be super expensive and luxurious, no? Like
there are different options. So if you're a backpacker and don't even do it with a travel agent, you can just travel from Chiang Mai to the border of Laos and take a cruise there and stay overnight. You don't stay on the boat with this. There is a place called Phak Beng, where there are homestays and resorts where you stay overnight and then travel again the next day. It can be done quite cheap from what I read. But if you
you can
do
still go along the river but do it cheap.
Yeah, like they're small boats and they're very simple, and even locals are using them. So you would travel basically from the Laos border to that small village, and then next day to Luang Prabang, and these are very simple small boats. And you get very simple meals or take your own meal. But yeah, most people that want to do it, like these clients that we did, their journey costs, don't want to lie now, but I think for 2 people, $1,500. So
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
that is the
But
most expensive.
especially for our audience, that if you are going to, because what you're talking about, a local boat is not something that we'll be able to support them with. And
But there's one cheaper option that's still comfortable and has a good stay night option that we can book in advance that would only cost, I think, $200 per person. So it is possible cheaper.
Okay.
Yeah, it's possible.
Okay. Okay.
Like from my research and from the operators that were suggested to me, there's a really expensive one, and then the cheaper one that is around $150 to $200, and then there's a backpacker option that you do on your own.
So the 150 to 200, you're staying on the boat, or you camp, you stay.
Never stay on the boat. You can't, and it can never stay because the Mekong River it's too dangerous at night. It's very strong currents and stuff. So you would always stay in a homestay or resort in Phak Beng.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So of course, this journey in 21 days, seeing 4 countries, can get quite busy. But however, if everything is organized in advance and your activities and transport and hotels, everything is booked in advance, you actually do have sufficient time to experience everything. Of course, you would only see the most popular cities of the region, but it's a very diverse trip, from temples, Buddhism, to the very different kind of Vietnam religion and culture, to Thailand. You can finish off even then with a week at the beaches of Thailand, spend an entire month in the region. So it is a very diverse and very interesting trip, but yeah, it can get quite rushed with little time to relax. And that is possible throughout the year, but of course you can, in May or April, it would get very, very hot in Cambodia and south of Vietnam. And in the winter, it would get quite cold in North Vietnam and Laos, but it's never impossible. There will never be a time where it's completely, except of maybe the typhoon in August, typhoon period, but then you can just skip Ha Long Bay and do Ninh Binh instead, or Sapa even. Yeah, so that's for the presentation bit. You want to do questions first or the Kahoot first, or you should do questions first, no?
Questions first.
Okay. Sorry for me talking so fast, but I wanted to bring a lot across. So if you have any questions, please shoot.
Adina, how about the internet connectivity in this country?
Very good, very good. It's not like in China where your social media is cut off. You can access everything. Instagram, social media, Google, everything is available. And yeah, all hotels have Wi-Fi, all hostels have Wi-Fi. You get very quickly and very simple and very cheap SIM cards. So in both Cambodia and Vietnam, I had within half an hour of being in the country or 1 hour of being in the country, I had a new SIM card. It's very simple.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
Adina, can you just quickly brush through the weather situation, because I found it a bit complex. So, like, quickly just to summarize.
Right. Yeah. It is complicated, and I even have to look it up every time I want to explain it to people. Let me just go back. So you see here in this infographic that Luana made for us, you see 3 different regions: the north, the central Vietnam, and south. So in the north, the best time to travel is in spring and in fall, because in the summer it gets rainy and hot, like not too hot, but it gets rainy. and in the winter it can get really cold. So you would travel in spring and fall where it doesn't rain too much and the temperatures are not getting too high. However, here in Halong Bay, a very popular destination, it can get in July and August very dangerous, and the cruise might not be possible. So definitely have to be avoided. But that is then a good time to go into the mountain area, because over there the rice fields are very green and it's very nice for photography. So basically north, simple, best time to go spring and fall. And central Vietnam gets the rain later. It gets it from end of August, September until January, with the most rains in October and November. And then the dry season and the best time to go is February to August. So in the summer, it doesn't get too crazy hot, and it also doesn't rain. So that is a good time to travel if you want to travel in the summer months or in spring. And then the south gets climate like in India, where you have the dry season and the rain season, and it starts raining in June until August or September, and with the worst rain in July and August. Temperatures are all throughout the year hot, except for the mountains. It cools down, of course, in the highlands, but it's always pretty hot down there and humid, and rains more in the summer months or in the monsoon months. So you have basically the tropical climate in the south, central where you have the same climate as in the east coast of India, where it rains later in the year, and then the north, which has almost European weather with the different seasons: cold winter, warmer summers, rain in the summer months. Oh, by the way, what I didn't mention is actually in the north, it can always rain. So it might be raining more in the summer months, but you can get actually rain throughout the year. It's just less. It's less in the winter, it's less in fall, it's less in spring, but it's not that it stops entirely. It can always rain a little bit.
Okay.
Was that all right?
Yeah,
Adina,
it's much little more clearer. Yeah.
Adina, just to add just one quick question to this. So if someone is looking at, say our client is open but is looking for like an all Vietnam trip, which are the no-go months? I know you said that you can visit any time of the year, but are there like any 1 month or 2 months which are absolutely no-go? Like how in May in India, we are like, unless you're going to the mountains, don't come. Is there any absolute no-go months to Vietnam?
That would be probably end of August or August and beginning of September, because then it's the tropical storms in the north, and it starts raining in central, and it still rains in the south. So yeah, that could affect your travels. But the best time would be again Feb and March.
Okay, that we got. No, so you're saying no-go months are end of August to beginning of September.
Well,
So just 2 weeks.
I mean, it's difficult to say, because even in India, like the rain season can sometimes end in August, and over there it can start early in August. So I traveled in August and I was fine, but I know that the tropical storm happened in the North Vietnam. So probably I would say in general, avoid August and avoid the first 2 weeks of September, but then you're fine.
Okay. And otherwise,
Adina.
outside of that, anytime is possible.
Yeah.
We will decide where you want to go, and all of Feb to mid-March is the best time to go anywhere. You can go anywhere.
Exactly.
Okay.
Wouldn't that be the same for June as well?
Sorry?
Like for Feb and the early March bit, can't one travel to say June and July? Even that is good, right?
I didn't understand the question, sorry.
Abad just said that Feb and early March is the best time to visit the country. If you want to explore the entire bit, right?
Yeah.
Now, even June and July is a good months, right?
It is, but then in South Vietnam, it gets super, super hot.
Okay.
So in that period of time, like let's say you want to travel between March and August, beginning of August or July, you should only focus on North and Central Vietnam, and maybe avoid. I mean, you could only do the city. In the city, probably people can live with the heat. They have their AC hotel. But traveling to Mekong Delta, traveling to along the coast in South Vietnam, all of these things I would not do, because it's just too humid, too hot. I mean, it's constantly 35 degrees, you know?
Yeah.
It's like the May month here. But yeah, the north is actually for that perfect, because like I said, it's that seasonal weather where it doesn't get too hot and just rains a little bit. Any more questions?
Adina, I just had, if anyone else, just quickly, when you said you did a lot of cycling tours and walking tours, were these led by locals, and do they, would the tour leaders consistently speak like decent and good English for all these? Because you said a lot of activities.
Um, it depends on the price you pay and with what kind of provider you go. So I did also bicycle tours in Hoi An that were quite cheap, but the guide wouldn't speak much English. He would just take you on a nice route, on a picturesque route, but not explain much. But if you're able to pay a little bit more and you probably go with a travel agent like us, you would get a good bicycle tour with a good guide. So the one that I did this time, the guide was female and absolutely fantastic and gave us like shots of rice wine and did the conical rides with us. And so yeah, they speak fantastic English. And even but you have to see, for example, the motorbike tour that I did in Ho Chi Minh City, which is the experience of riding a motorbike in the city as well as street food, as well as a little bit of nightlife. They call it Saigon by Night tour. That costs in a normal circumstance, I think $90 per person. So it's expensive.
But so basically, we are able to cherry pick our experiences where we know that language won't be a barrier.
Yes, for sure. We have. I think I have now. I mean, Alia saw the activity sheet that I made. There's a huge selection of activities.
Those are okay. And when you spoke about North Vietnam being very cold in the winter, is it just like India in the sense that hotel facilities have absolutely no heating, or do they have heating like Western countries?
They do have heating. They actually, the homestays wouldn't have hostels, but the rest of them do. They do. In Hanoi, not so much, because Hanoi, it's very rare that it gets so cold that you're really freezing. They just give you then warmer blankets and stuff. That is like Delhi in a way. But in the mountains, Sapa, you have hotels with heating system, yes.
So if you have someone from Europe who says that cold is not a problem, they can still go because they'll have that. And if they're not super budget, they can still pay for a little bit of heating and all.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Central heating systems in Sapa, in multiple hotels. Even heated pools, inside pools.
Okay, so it's not that huge. Cool.
I also got a question. When as you said, motorbike tours are more, means the main transport is by motorbikes. They don't do car. Means the people, if they are older age, if they don't want to opt for a bike, can they do tours on cars like in India we do the long car thing?
Sorry, I did not fully understand. You were asking about if people can do, instead of motorbike, the car journey.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
for sure. So that high band path, the most popular route for motorbikes, I emphasize it for the motorbike trips because it's a popular thing to do. But for sure, you can also do it by car with a guide on board who also shows you the same sites, who shows you the French bunker and the beach and stops at the nice viewpoints. There's even a train journey you can take on that same route, as well as buses as well for people that are really cheap. But and also from Na to where you can do by car, where to Hoi An you can do by car, Ho Chi Minh City to Mekong Delta you can do by car. You can do, of course, from Hanoi to Halong Bay, you can either do that with shared transport in small minivans with the entire other cruise passengers, or on your private car. You can go to Sapa even by car. That's a long journey of like 7 hours. But yeah, for sure possible. So there are a couple of travel between destinations that are possible by car in a comfortable way. But for the luxury clients and even comfort clients, I would probably suggest to take a guide on board, because the communication with the driver is otherwise very difficult.
So you will see the drivers won't be that good in English. Means,
No,
yeah.
no. They're really just they're reliable and they're professional, but they don't speak English.
No.
I don't know. I haven't found out if there's maybe options where the driver itself is a guide. Like in Sri Lanka, it happens a couple of times. But I think most of the time it's driver plus guide. That is the experience and what I heard from the DMCs.
Okay. And Adina, the pillion bike ride experience that you did, is something like that possible even in the Sapa region, which we can book for someone like either for a day or a couple of days, where pillion takes them from place to place?
Yeah,
Or,
they're like probably in that region. If you want to do multiple days, I would suggest something that Samir did, where you're in a group with other people, like a shared group experience, because that's cheaper. You're still a co-passenger and you have a guide, but you're probably in a group with other people, because that would get more affordable. And this is something anyways more backpacker and budget travelers would do. And the comfort and luxury clients, I would just say, do this journey then by car. So we had one client, Suhail and Sana, who did, they didn't go all the way to Sapa, but they also went into the mountains close to Hangzhou, which is also close to the Chinese border, but more on the east side. And has also really interesting nature places like lakes and waterfalls. And they did that journey in a group tour as well by minibus.
Okay, they did a group journey by minibus. Okay.
When it comes to multi-days journey on a bike, then I would just do that on a group because that's more affordable.
But which is the one that you did? You did it in Central, no?
I did it just on a one-day journey from Hoi An to Hue, which would, by normal car, if you go another route, that more direct route, that route would only take 3 hours. But if you take the scenic route with all the sightseeing, you take from 10 a.m. until 5 p.m.
So that's what. Is that seems quite an established experience where you did it. But are there these kind of established experiences where you can go with a pillion from Hanoi to Sapa or anything like that, or no?
No, like from Hanoi to Sapa, that's too far, and that's not recommended. But it is in a couple of other places, for example, in the south, in Dalat. So I mentioned the hill station, Dalat to Mui Ne. I've even read it from Mui Ne to Nha Trang, all the way to Phong Nha. Of course, I met a lot of backpackers who would just buy or rent their own bike and do the whole length of Vietnam, but that is just an extreme example.
Yeah, but that's again not our audience.
No, that's not our audience exactly. But yes, there are other places where you can do it, but the most popular place where most people do it, also because it's a destination where you would go for, is from Hoi An to Hue.
Because just with our audience, if our audience they're going to rent a bike and do 4, 5, 6 days, then it's not our audience because we won't be able to. But wherever we can find that experience like what you did with a pillion, it would be good for our clients.
It's more safe because you don't drive yourself. So if you run into any problems on the road, you don't have that issue of dealing with mechanics or authorities. You can enjoy the view more from the bike on the back. And you can also just travel in Vietnam with your own bike if you have an international or Vietnamese driving license. And a lot of people even don't have that.
Okay. And Adina, this is something we can also discuss later. I know that on a lot of our blogs, we are saying that riding a bike on your own is a no-no. Like someone like me or someone like Rishabh, and there'll be a lot of audience who do ride a bike, I think, or Samir, for them, it's not a problem at all.
It's just, it's difficult if you would say you can do it because then it gives us a responsibility, and if something happens, then it's an issue, right?
No, which I get it, but I just think, and we can discuss this later, but like someone like me or even like a Samir, like say I would book an entire trip through Vietnam someday, but I would like 3 or 4 days where you just help me rent a bike. And even if like the accommodation is booked, but I have the bike and me and my friend can, so that's something we'll have to look at eventually.
Yes, if you get back to the same destination, then it's possible. But if you, for example, want to drive on your own between Hoi An and Hanoi for 6 days, I don't know how.
You'll get back to the same destination. So if you're telling me like, hey, Abbas, this is the 5 days that you can do X Hanoi, where you explore all of Sapa on a bike and you come back and you drop a bike. I think that's something that would work for us.
If these people don't put any responsibility on us, we can arrange for it, yes.
So we can arrange for bike hires and stuff.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. But that's something I can see, like even with a lot of Indians, if you're targeting Indians, like a lot of my friends would ride bikes and they would not want to do entire 2 weeks on a bike, but they would love to do like 3-4 days where we recommend that this is a nice region. You can leave all your stuff over here, pack light, do 4 days and come back. So we can identify those kind of routes.
So the thing is with that Easy Rider that I did, what they often do is they have a group of friends where maybe the lady doesn't want to drive on her own, so she's on the back of a Vietnamese driver, but the boyfriend or the husband would drive his own bike, and Easy Rider would organize the whole thing. So they would only organize one driver, but 2 bikes, and she would go either on her husband's back or on the driver's back, and he would drive on his own. So that I've seen a lot as well. So the same companies that would do the pillion ride would also give you a bike as well.
So see, it actually depends. I think every travel agency works in a different way. The one that I went with, we were not having people sitting behind us. We were riding it ourselves. But somebody's wife who doesn't want to ride. So there's a car following the entire group behind. So they are in the car at the back. So I think there's a lot of formation combinations that they use and can be changed according to needs.
Cool.
It's just that one route in central Vietnam became really famous as it because of the Top Gear episode. Like that really exploded for motorbike travels in Vietnam.
So this Easy Riders that you're saying is more central Vietnam, that region based, or it's everywhere?
They offer it now also in the south and north, but most of their business comes from that route.
Okay, cool, got it. Okay, I don't have any questions.
One last question from me. The way you explained Natra for beaches, would you compare it to the Goa of Vietnam, or which would be the best beach place in Vietnam?
So as you see that Vietnam has a very long coastline, so obviously a lot of beaches, but the currents and the weather on the beaches is very different. So if somebody just really wants to chill and do nothing else, then I would say Phu Quoc, which is the island in South Vietnam. Always has pleasant weather through winter and summer. It can get in the rain season, of course, rain, but it's a very good beach destination. But you have to definitely take a flight there because it's an island. Other than that, there is Mui Ne and Nha Trang, which I mentioned, and as well as Hoi An, where the old city is, close by are beaches. The problem in Vietnam, though, which is something that I find really, really unfortunate, is that all the beach destinations in mainland of Vietnam are just full of ugly skyscraper hotels and don't have a lot of don't have the Goa vibe of like beach shacks and palm trees and hammocks and so it's very commercialized, which is a pity and very sad. So if you just want to do it for like diving and snorkeling, then these places are okay. But if you really want to have that beach Thailand beach bum holiday, then go on Phu Quoc. There's no other option. Phu Quoc is that island.
Yeah. For oh yeah, means you can't go by ferry. Only means just flight, right?
Yeah, you can. That's actually, I even heard recently there is a ferry from South Vietnam to Phu Quoc Island. There is a ferry, but I should probably add a lot of time to traveling. And Sign Up even found recently a flight directly from Hoi An or Da Nang, which is close to Hoi An, all the way to Phu Quoc Island directly. So that is even possible now to travel from central Vietnam onto the island directly. So it's very nice.
Thanks.
Cool. Any other questions?
I hope I really said everything that I put into the Kahoot. Otherwise, don't kill me.
So then I'm going to stop the recording. If no one has any questions, so you can go to the Kahoot. No questions, no? Okay.